Good morning. What's up, Charlie? How you doing? Thanks for having us. Excited to be here. Charlie, why don't you kick things off and just give us a description of Infinite Athlete. Tell us about the business.
Yeah, sure. So Infinite Athlete started 5 years ago. It was born out of the work that we did 7 years ago at the AAF, which was the startup football league that we did with the NFL. The underlying premise was that well, let me back up. I grew up in sports. My dad was the chairman of NBC Sports for 25 years, just about. And the first time I was ever allowed to root for a team to win, like pick a side, was last year when our company became the front of shirt sponsor of Chelsea. Prior to that, I was the 11-year-old that had the NFL Shield hat. I looked like Rob Lowe at every game. And I was rooting for overtime, or at least a close game so the television ratings were good, because I couldn't piss off whichever owner was on the media committee, when I'm 11.
You're rooting for overtime because of that, and I'm rooting for it because I have it 11-1.
Yeah, exactly. And now that I am rooting for sports teams, I'm like, why would anyone choose to do this? This is terrible. My emotions are tied to this thing that it's horrible. Anyway, so the basic premise came out of the fact that sports is a licensing business at its core, right? So they have intellectual property, and their business model is basically take what they're doing and make you pay for as little of it as possible so they can sell it to a certain number of people. The problem with the licensing business is twofold. One, you have a limited number of buyers that can, at a certain point in time, you have a limited number of buyers who can pay. So you have NBC, CBS, Fox, ESPN, that their whole business model is predicated on, so they pay huge amounts of money. But now, when you're in this transitional period where you have Amazon, Apple, et cetera, where they're really dipping their toe in the water, they don't need sports content the way that the traditional broadcasters do. And so you have a challenge where 80 to 90% of your revenue is coming from these 4 or 5 people, and those 4 or 5 people can't afford to do it. So you have that side. The other problem with the licensing business is that licensing loves outsourcing. Like if you're a licensing business, you want to be a high margin business, you want to get as much of the risk off your books as possible, so you outsource everything. So I was speaking at the Sports Tech Conference yesterday for SBJ, and it's like 400 companies in that room that are all doing some very small part of the tech stack for the sports league to make it work. If you're a licensing business and you're outsourcing, you don't want to wake up in the morning and have one of those companies have too much power. So you don't let them interact with each other. You do everything you can to isolate them. And so you can't build anything. So long story short, when we started the AAF, part of the premise was the NFL and my company worked to create an exact replica of the NFL's tech stack with all the same vendors. And then we built a technical solution that allowed you to synchronize all those things into a single API. Now, if you want to think about a business model that this is coming from, think about Google Maps. In 2004, Google spends $1 billion to create Google Maps. It's how I found this venue today. That business in the last 20 years has made $50 billion in gross revenue by licensing its mapping, what's on the map. So you're Starbucks, you want people to go to Starbucks, you pay 10 cents for people to find you on the map to Google. It's a good business. The Google Maps API, which is the same technology, basically takes all the tech that allows the map to exist and says to anyone who has a good idea for a business, pay me incrementally and I'll give you the back-end software, so all you have to do is build the front-end experience, you can create a company. There are 1 million developers on the Google Maps API doing 20 billion API calls a day. The best example, which probably half of you used to get here today, is Uber. Travis Kalanick and Garrett Camp couldn't afford to map San Francisco, let alone the entire world, but they could incrementally pay Google for access to their mapping software so that you're here, your car is here, you want them to come together, you want to know the traffic. Google charges $7 for every 1,000 times you have to query their API, and the average Uber ride is hundreds of API calls. Google has made, this is not an exaggeration, $1 trillion in the last 20 years on the Google Maps API. $50 billion from licensing, $1 trillion from empowerment. So you go from a content licensing business, aka the sports business, to a creation empowerment business, and you make a lot more money. And you don't live in a world in which the best ideas can only come from your 5 partners, they come from the entire world. So we do that for sports. We built an API where every single piece of data generated at a live sporting event is synchronized by our technology. We're not competitive with any of the vendors. We in a lot of cases, we're going to the vendors and saying, we'll take over all your back-end work that costs you a ton of money to run, so we increase their management, their margins, and then they can build better front end. But what's really happening is, and it's particularly exciting in this context, is anyone who has a good idea, who's in a garage somewhere, who doesn't want to spend $3 million of venture capital money building the back end of the software, can come in and get all that back end and then just build a good idea on the front end of it.
So how do you do it? How do you get all that? Like, talk us through kind of what that, we can all imagine an NFL game. Talk us through the tech stack. What's in the venue? And then how do you get to this API of events? What does it look like?
Yeah, I mean, what the breakthrough discovery was that one of the values of our engineering team is I have very few sports fans that work for me. And so none of them come with preconceived notions about how things are supposed to be done. So for example, they've basically been doing broadcasts the same way in professional sports since the early 90s, right? Like all the cameras, I think, they all come back to a closet, and in that closet, it then gets forced out the back, literally oftentimes a hole in the wall that gets pushed into a truck, and that's where it happens. And the advancements have basically just been like, do we put a router there, et cetera. What we literally did was we created a piece of hardware, it's very small, that every single piece of data would just click into that, and then it would still go to where it needed to go, but it would have to come there, and we applied a timestamp. So the original name of the company was Tempus Ex Machina, time from the machine, because we created our first patent was Tempus Ex Machina. It was a piece of tech that could synchronize any type of data because it applied a timestamp to it instead of trying to read the data. And then our second patent was this piece of AI that could then analyze everything that was happening at each timestamp every 5 milliseconds, and it could tell the developer, this is all the stuff organized. Like, for example, at minute blah, 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 millisecond 23, the ball was snapped to Patrick Mahomes, and these are the 22 players that are on the field, and he's at the 13-yard line, and it's the third quarter, and all that metadata then lives forever all the way down the stack, as opposed to what's currently happening, which is somebody watches the game with a pair of binoculars, none of this is an exaggeration, types down what they saw, and then hits send, and it becomes an Excel sheet, and it goes to the data aggregator, and the data aggregator then emails it or sends a JSON file. Like, that metadata is not tied to what happened in the game, so then someone else has to be like, oh, wait, that was, okay, here, and then they manually put it back together. Now they can just get on the API, and they can just tell us this is all the information we want to see, and build whatever they want to build.
And you're doing this all through video, is that right?
No, we do it through everything. So we do the NFL, we do, we're in the Premier League and a handful of other places. We're agnostic on sport, and we're agnostic on data. So we take optical tracking, we take physical tracking chips on the players, we take LiDAR, radar, we take all the broadcast cameras, all the network cameras, all the stadium cameras, all the security cameras, we take all the stats inputs, we take audio, and all of that data gets normalized into the API, and then we have this other AI model that sits on top of it, which then makes sense of it as a live piece of derivative data. So at about anywhere from 100 to 250 milliseconds of latency, you have all of the metadata, plus you have all the game state information in one place.
Yeah, yeah. The latency, the elimination of latency from your platform is, I mean, I've spent some time with it. It's unbelievable to see going from the actual example of people sitting there pressing buttons in an arena to a point where you can aggregate all of this data through multiple sources and have real-time data out the other end. It's very clearly the way it should be. And I guess, how do you think about, you have sort of sports leagues, which we kicked off with on one side, of which there are very few examples where they can build technology well, right? If at all. I mean, I was fortunate enough to work at BAMTech, and we built some technology, but that was completely divorced from the league, right? The separation of the group that just wants to make money licensing versus a team that's just focused on innovation, that really led to something that was, a great streaming technology acquired by Disney. So who builds on your platform?
So right now there are 30. We opened the marketplace for the first time to people being able to be on it in Q3 of last year, and there are 30 companies that have built products on it so far, and they range from, I won't say their names, but 2 of the 5 largest companies in the world who are in the sports business, to 3 guys in their garage in Miami who have an idea for how to create no pun intended, an infinite number of available parlays across multiple games because you obviously can see all the in-play data simultaneously. There's a product that's being built, I was talking to Corey about this last night, there's a product being built where if you think about Bitcoin mining, just to give you a sense of the scope, there's a product that's being built that the theory is that you would do the equivalent of Bitcoin mining, but instead of using complex calculations, you have to accurately guess, this is simplified, but the number of times that Steph Curry will dribble the ball with his left hand on his side of the court in the second quarter. It's a finite thing. You'd have to have it down to the number. You'd have to be able to calculate it, and then there's all these other ways that he does it. But now all of a sudden, you're taking something that is a widely viewed, incorruptible, objective event, and you're able to turn it into something that's outside. The reason I was convinced this was a good business model was because when they created the Google Maps API, nobody thought of ride sharing. Nobody thought we were going to be renting the back seat of our Camry as like our profession. And yet, $100 billion, 2 times the amount of money that Google Maps, the app, has made in 20 years, 2 times that was made basically just from the segment created by ride sharing and food delivery and these sort of sub-businesses. And so when I raised the first round of capital, and we were fortunate, we were Andreessen Horowitz and General Catalyst and founders of Silver Lake and Clear Lake and Eldridge, et cetera. Every time we'd raise money, people would say, well, what is the great idea that's going to come out of this? And I was like, I have no idea. I just know that if you give access, if you democratize access, everyone will have a better idea. Like you just walk around this conference and you see the companies that have these side businesses to the core business. Okay, we're talking about betting, but think about all the mechanisms that are required to make that valuable. We're all sitting here now. A year ago, well, 5 years ago, you were there. I got up on stage at the American Gaming Association. And I basically called everyone con men. Because it was like, you're selling a 4% margin business. Like if I pitched any other industry and was like, I have a great business, it's a 4% margin business, nobody would give me money. But if I was like, I have a 4% margin business, it's gambling, they're like, yeah, here's tons of cash. Because it'll work out at some point. A year ago that was true. That's no longer true because we now know that multi-game parlays are a 27% margin business, and that's a great business. And that innovation is in its infancy. And I think that what we haven't even started to dig into is, again, sorry, another fun tangent. Don't bet on horse racing. Horse racing is a figured out business. Like there are entire private equity firms that are funded by the mechanism of just betting on horse racing because there are enough horse races and there's enough data around it that you can hit basically 70% of the time on just mechanizing that platform. But that's because 4 guys at Carnegie Mellon 17 years ago just took the time to do the math on horse racing. We're like, there's a business here where I could actually just print money. I can play it like a commodities market. Well, the same thing is obviously true about all the other sports. Like the outcomes are fairly deterministic, but there isn't enough data sitting there. Like you see all the AI that's being done around American football or baseball right now, et cetera. They're talking about like 50,000 plays. We've been in the NFL and college football for the last 4.5 years. We're sitting on like, I don't remember what the number is. It's like 1 million or 1.1 million or whatever. That's a business model that is completely separate in terms of what people could build on it if you opened it up to a ton of people. I can really go down rabbit holes in this conversation.
Well, I think like, I mean, to talk about gaming, if I was running a gaming company, I mean, we build software for sports bettors.
If you were running a gaming company.
But if I was pricing, I mean, your data would be the first, I mean, I would skip, all due respect, I would skip Genius, I would skip Sport Radar, and I would say, damn, this guy, like the repository of data that Infinite Athlete has, it has everything I need, from play-by-play to who's on the field to be able to price micro betting, because I think the trend that we all see in gaming is, you know, Americans clearly love to bet a little bit with the potential to win a lot. That is the innovation of Prize Picks, Underdog, is that these are like lottery ticket businesses built on sports outcomes. And I think the same game parlay is the same exact example. I want to just bet on, you know, 3-4 outcomes in a single game. That gives me more of a reason to sweat, and I can put $5 to win 150 or whatever it is, even more, 600. So when you talk about the Steph Curry example, talk to me about like how this can apply to gaming businesses, because I don't know, to me it feels like if you're a gaming business, the most important things you can have is a lot of markets open for as long as possible, and it seems like your technology enables that, no?
So everyone's seen the clip of Travis Kelce screaming at Andy Reid on the sideline during the Super Bowl, and Andy falls over it, right? So go back about 45 seconds.
By the way, was Taylor Swift like a little alarmed in that moment, or?
No, I think she was like, he's passionate.
She's like, it's okay. I'm cool with this. I'm going to be all right with this if he's like screaming at me.
It'll make for a great song.
I wanted water, not soda water.
She's going to win a Grammy based on whatever she writes about that moment. Go back 45 seconds. Kelce's on the field. They run a play. Kelce gets pulled off the field in a hurry-up offense. They run the next play. It obviously doesn't work out well. Kelce's pissed that he wasn't in the play. It was impossible for anyone to change the odds of them scoring a touchdown during that drive on that play because nobody could provide the data fast enough. No available source based on the sources you're talking about, and I'm not commenting on
others.
Companies. I think they're all fantastic. Shout out to Carson's and Mark Locke, great guys. You couldn't take a bet on that because nobody was giving the information. But let's say you could. Let's say it was in play, and we knew Kelce was on the field for the play or not on the field, and it changed the outcome of the field. You wouldn't know. Nobody was providing the information. Say Kelce's lined up on the left side. The defense is in a 4-3 strong man with a joker. Like, you're not seeing that. You're not seeing that in the betting information. You're not seeing that anywhere. So where we're going is people are fixated on things like latency, but the actual reality is metadata is the actual value set. It's not just that I want to know it fast, it's that I need to know all of the permutations of what's going on. I can tell you in a fraction of a second every single time that Kansas City is lined up in the last 3 years on the 1 yard line when Kelce is in the slot versus Kelce's on the end, Kelce's on the right side, et cetera, facing these types of data sets. But not only can I tell you all that information, I can tell it to you live while it's happening, and I can offer you new odds based on, not me, I don't do odds. I'm saying someone can build on our tech stack to be able to do that instantaneously because they can just put their variables in, and our calculus is pushing it out to them automatically in that situation. That's the differentiator. We're getting, like, we can go down this thread, but let me back up for a second. I heard this economist gave this speech. I think it was at Davos a couple of weeks ago, I think it was at Davos. And he said, in 1776, the feudalist economy died. But nobody in Britain figured it out for like another 50 years, that capitalism had arrived and feudalism was dead. It took 50 years for people to catch up. And he says he believes, and I agree with him, that I think capitalism died about 8 years ago with the creation of the platform. That Amazon is not a capitalist environment. Amazon is a platform. Google is not a capitalist environment. It is a platform. Apple is not a These 6 largest companies in the world, which represent something like 20% of the US economy, 6 companies represent 20% of the US economy, and they are platform companies. They are not capitalist companies. Like, they're not in competitive environments because they've created their own false market, which we have to build on to be a part of it. That is not a capitalist society. That is a platform economy, right? Well, the sports leagues, which are the largest aggregator of people in the world, right? When my dad retired in 2011, this is such an insane stat, my dad had produced 8 of the 11 most watched events in the history of the world. That's a function of the fact that we as sports people want to be around a communal event around sports and anything that excites them. The leagues are not platforms. The leagues outsource and license their stuff to people who, by the way, also aren't platforms, with the exception of Amazon and Apple. So you have this weird experience going on of like, we're aggregating all these people and we're talking about like PII and information and they don't own their customer. It's like, you don't, forget the customer, you don't own the ecosystem. You know what I mean? And so from our
perspective, they don't own the data, yeah.
Right, and they talk about data. We're going to do our audience participation. By a show of hands, when I say data in sports, how many people are thinking about stats? When I say you buy sports data, how many people are thinking about stats? Right, okay. Sorry, it's early. We don't need to all, it's a lot of effort to get the hand up. There we go, thank you. But if I was at a tech conference in San Francisco and I said, what's data? They would not differentiate between stats and video. That's the same thing. It's the same data. It's still flowing through the system. And so by creating that separation and saying we sell video over here and we sell data over here and they're different things and we don't treat them the same way, you're immediately separating the core elements of what allow you to build something that's valuable.
Yeah. So you have leagues who obviously need your data. You have gaming companies who need your data. And you have, Joe and Sally in a garage. How do you think about pricing? Because this data is, as you think about platform plays, and all investors want to invest in platform plays, and that's why you have such a fantastic group of investors backing Infinite Athlete. How do you think about price?
Well, so going back to my point about data as data versus video and how we define it, I don't care how you use the API. In fact, I don't want to put any restrictions on you to use the API how you want to use it, because if Google had been the NBA or the NFL, when they created the Google Maps API, they would have gone to Microsoft and been like, we will sell you exclusivity for ride sharing for $1 billion a year. And Microsoft would have been like, great, I own this space. And everyone would have felt good about it. And they would have left $99 billion on the table because Travis Kalanick and Garrett Camp and Lyft and all these other people wouldn't have been able to do it. What they said was, normally I would have a visual so you can see this. If you've never been on the Google Maps API marketplace, just take 5 seconds today, go on your phone or on your laptop and look at it. They have a table with what do you call it? Where you slide things, sliders. And you say, like, I think there are going to be this many users on Android. I think there are going to be this many users on iPhone. I think there are going to be this many people that I need dynamic mapping. I need this amount for traffic. I need this number for multi-phone positions. I need this much for that. And at the bottom it says, great, based on all of this other stuff, your per API use is going to be $3.25. And if you drop below these numbers, it's going to be $5. And if you go above these numbers, it's going to go $1.25. And then I can build an entire business model around, okay, that's how many times I'm an API. Uber could be selling car rides for $10,000 a ride or whatever. I don't care. That's not my business model. However many times you need to use it, go use it. The way we talk about sports data and the way we talk about video is like, if you use 1 second of video, it's $15,000. We have created a marketplace that justifies it. It's 18,000. I mean, BAM perfected this. Like, it was an incredible business model. But you're then saying, scarcity matters, exclusivity matters. So when you look at like the blockchain craze of a couple of years ago, there was no difference between the deals that Dapper Labs was doing for Top Shot and TikTok and Facebook were doing for highlights. There's no difference. They were taking this, in fact, they were taking the same clips and then just being like, oh, and now it's on the blockchain, so now you have to pay whatever for it. But NBA was charging them the same amount of money. They were like, you want a piece of video, it's 7 seconds of video, it's LeBron James, so it's $18,000 for that piece of video. And then they created a marketplace around what they were doing.
Your view is make it completely dynamic, completely dependent
Exactly.
upon the whatever, the menu. You can choose the menu if you want LiDAR, if you want, players on the field, if you whatever you want. And you can build whatever, just depending on your needs.
Yeah, and you can get as granular as you want. Like, that's my point, is if everything is one place, then when you get all the way down, let's say you're like, and I'm building a highlight machine. Okay, well then you have to go to the NFL and you got to pay for highlights because that's a whatever. But if you're like, I'm going to do all this other stuff and I'm going to come up with a calculator for sports books so they can make an infinite number of parlays or whatever, the NFL is going to make their money off of the API with me. They don't need to make money off of your access point to a certain type of data. In fact, I wouldn't even clarify it as being live game data in that sense.
I think you're going to break the minds of a lot of people in here because we're just all used to, no, everything is fixed fee.
Yeah, I know. My favorite, there's a great speech that Steve Jobs gave at a college like 30 years ago or 35 years ago, where he said, like, the biggest mistake everyone makes is that they forget that absolutely everything you interact with in your life was thought of by someone no smarter than you. And we just accept it now as a reality. Like, we sit on chairs the way we sit on chairs because somebody thought this is the best way to chair. Is it? I don't know. There's probably a better way. We all, if I stood on this stage 10 years ago, 15 years ago, and said, taxis are going to be disintermediated in New York, and medallions are going to basically be liabilities. They're not going to be assets, and people mortgaging their houses for taxi medallions are going to be underwater. Anyone who understood the economy would be like, you're insane. There's no way. First of all, they control the city. And yet, and if I told you 22 years ago that MapQuest and Garmin was going to be disintermediated by Google giving away free mapping, you'd be like, I don't really think about navigation. I don't really care about that. I've got my Thomas guide or my whatever map. Like that's how I get it's the 70. That's how I get to LA.
Things change so fast.
Instantaneously, and they change because people say, actually, you don't get to the light bulb by constantly improving the candle. I'm also quoting someone in that situation, just so we don't call me plagiarizing. Like, we are so fixated on like, I can build a better wick. Like, if I just dip it in kerosene and then put it'll burn brighter. It's like, cool, try that. I'm gonna use my LED flashlight.
Yeah, cool.
And that's time.
And that's it. Charlie, if you need data, if you need live data, check out Infinite Athlete. But yeah, Charlie, thanks for doing that.
But if you wanna make money, work with OddsJam.
That's a fact.
Thanks, guys.